Welcome, everyone, to Unity Live. We're so grateful that you're here.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us today.
We have an incredible show for you today. Psychic, teacher, and award-winning author Paul Selig is joining us today, and we're so excited to explore his new book, The Kingdom. But before we do that, we're going to get into a beautiful blessing of the tea.
In this, for those of you who have not previously joined us in our UniTea gathering, we like to do a blessing of tea that we've prepared, as well as a blessing of our cellular water. So if everyone who's joining would like to close their eyes for a moment, dropping into our heart space, taking a few soft, deep breaths and really connecting with our heart. And as we do so, allowing the frequencies and the light that is joining us here and now to flow ever so gently down and through our central channels. Ariasuni ayakun unsanyando. Ayondo esea kush ayaniani. Undaya asuni o oshea kwasienu. Ayandayan unkayosonia. Uniani. Flowing down and pouring through us. This radiant diamond white light. Flowing down and through each and every one of our cells of each and every one of our bodies. Physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. Flowing down and through, and moving down and through our feet into the earth, connecting us and rooting us, engaging us in the diamond grid network of Sophia Gaia, and allowing for us to feel these pure and radiant flow of diamond energy, blessing our cellular water, blessing the tea and water that we've brought to consume, and opening us up into this beautiful heart connection of here and now. And so it is, and so it is, and so it is.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. And for everybody that's not, familiar, Brooklin has a monthly breathwork membership, and she actually is offering a free sacred breath experience that's tomorrow for anybody that is interested in joining it. I will leave the link in the show notes and in the chat below. And now it is my honor to introduce our guest today. Paul Selig attended New York University and received his master's degree from Yale. A spiritual experience in 1987 left him clairvoyant. Paul is one of the most foremost contributors to the field of channeled literature working today. Paul serves on the faculty of the Esalen Institute. He recently relocated to Hawaii, where he offers channeled workshops internationally. Paul, thank you again for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So we'd love to start by asking you, about your experience in 1987 that left you clairvoyant. Would you be able to share with us what that experience was like?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know what happened, and I don't, I can tell the story, and it's been an important story for me, but I don't know that I'll ever really understand it. It was the evening before this thing called the harmonic convergence that people were touting in 1987 as an opportunity to wake up. And I had been raised pretty much an atheist, but in the few months prior, I had just come to belief that there might be something more, and that was a very big step for me to think, well, if there is a God, that changes everything. And I thought, well, if there is a God and you ask to be woken up, which is what I heard was going to be happening, I thought, why would it say no? It just didn't make any sense to me. So I went up to this roof of this building that I was living in Manhattan. And I had a crystal and a mantra. Somebody had given me one of each. And I thought you needed the props to wake up. But I just started to try to teach myself to meditate, really, is what was happening. And I felt this energy start to build at the sort of pit of my being and begin to push its way up through my body and out through the top of my head. And it sort of left me frozen and rocking in this energy. And it was quite something for me. It was a tangible experience of energy. And for all I know, in retrospect, I was hyperventilating. You know, the mantra that I'd been given was a Kundalini mantra. I didn't know what Kundalini was. And people later said, well, it sounded like you may have had a spontaneous Kundalini awakening. Somebody once said, it sounds like a soul awakening. This woman said, did you lose the ability to hear during that? And I went, yeah, I did. Everything went quiet. And she said, that's a soul awakening. I didn't really know. I don't know that it matters, but I started seeing little lights around people after that. These little things like fireflies started going off. So, you know, it was the beginning of a much larger journey. And for me, that experience gave me a sense, I think, of a purpose. For whatever reason, maybe I needed something like that. I think also in retrospect, I'm enough of a skeptic and was enough of a skeptic. I'm not a good New Ager. I never have been, but something that was tangible that I could feel made a real dent in my skepticism. And that's, you know, what part of it allowed me to continue on to the work that I do now.
How have you come to know the guides that you work with?
Oh, it's a process, you know. I don't think I came in hearing fully. I don't know that most people do. Occasionally, I suppose there's somebody who's just got that equipment built in. But you know, the first voice I heard was in 1987, which was in response to prayer. I had been done praying for the first time in my life, and I heard an answer to the prayer, and it was blocked out all other thoughts. That was the first one. And then another one like that, similarly, you know, within a year. But I wouldn't have called myself a psychic or a clairaudient. I wasn't comfortable with those terms. I still don't like the term psychic, although it's part of what I do. But I ended up studying a form of energy healing. And I was volunteering at a center for people who were living with life-challenging illness. It was the height of the AIDS epidemic in New York. It was a very hard time, and people, you know, alternative care places were just popping up to support people who were getting no other support. And I got asked to volunteer. I said, okay, I guess I better do this. But I found that when I had my hands on people's bodies, I started to hear things for them. You know, I was new at this. But I found that if I had my hand on your back and I heard the name Headley, and I'm thinking, who the hell's Headley? I don't know anybody named Headley. And I learned to say, who's Headley? And they'd say, that's my lover, my son, my father, my wife. And so as that kept getting confirmed, I began to trust the radio station that I was picking up on. And that was the beginning. And then I started a little group that met in my apartment during that period. And I just wanted to sit in the energy. You know, I was doing work that my old healing teacher had taught, and she said, yes, you can do this. So I started doing this little group in my apartment. And the very first session, I started to hear things for the group. And I was very uncomfortable with it. And I'd say, I think I'm hearing this. It sounds like this. I was apologizing every other word. But the energy would come through. And for years, what I was getting was sort of energetic coordinates, attunements, the attunement to the word, which is in all the books, but it was in the very first book that they channeled through me, came at around that time. I was about 33 years old when it happened. And I didn't start channeling the way that I do now till about 2008. So I was well into this. I had this group that met in my apartment for 18 years. I mean, that was where I developed. And in some ways, it was where I was interning, I think, with the guides or being developed by them. But they told me that I needed to stop smoking, and I was a very heavy smoker. And they said, we would like to keep working with you, but you need to address this. And I didn't want him to go away. So I quit, which was amazing. Nobody ever thought I would quit. I was like a 4-pack a day guy. I used to channel and smoke out the window. But when I quit, that's when my whole system opened up into kind of high gear. And they began to lecture through me. And all I knew was that they were talking more, and I wasn't very interested in what they were saying. because I was much more interested in the energy, because you can't fake the energy. It's palpable. And I was sitting in a group and we'd all feel the energy. And that's what I liked about it. But that was the beginning. And once I became willing to record and then transcribe the lectures, and that probably took about a year, because I really didn't like to hear myself channel. I still don't. That's when they started dictating books. And so they've dictated, and there's 9 books that are in print now, and a 10th that is more than half done. And this is in about, 11 years now. I think the first book was dictated in 2009 and published in 2010. And now it's the work that I do. I was a college teacher for 25 years, It's what I did. I wasn't looking to be known at this, for this. I wasn't, desiring to become public. When I first got a website, I had which I had to do because people wanted to come for readings, but my name and my photograph didn't appear anywhere on the website. You had to know somebody to get an appointment. So that's how it started.
So I know that you channel the books in front of a live audience, and I was just curious to know how much the energy of the room or the setting impacts how the work comes through.
It's an interesting question. I mean, the first 2 or 3 books, I think I was dictating over the phone. There has to be an active listener, and I was recording and transcribing. And then they started doing the books in front of live workshops. I think that was the 3rd book that really started to kick in on. And I was surprised by that, because I just assumed it would always be done over the phone, and no, they prefer, I think, a group of students to work with. What I found about channeling in general, I mean, it doesn't sort of I can feel like crap, like 3 days. I was doing a book session on Zoom the other day, and there were a group of people, and I said, I feel like crap, that I don't think anything's going to happen. And they dictated a beautiful lecture. I mean, they're able to override my resistance or my emotional stuff or my physical baggage pretty well. I found that when I'm doing a public group, and when there's real resistance in the room, and it can be one person in the front row who just ain't having it, that the channeling can become a little more barky, strident, louder. It's as if the guides are having to move past something. And as soon as that resistance disappears, it starts to flow. But that doesn't happen much anymore. I did a book launch, free channeling for people about a week ago. And I wasn't expecting the guides to dictate a portion of a book in front of these people, because who knows what level they're coming to it. They just purchased a book and they got a free pass. And they did it, and I was quite surprised, because the content was not beginner's content. But the guides are going to do what the guides are going to do. And they're going to take every opportunity, I think, to get these things done. They're trying to get the current book done quickly through me, they said, to bypass my resistance to the information. So they're just delivering it. I don't really have that much time to think about it and to object, although I've been known to object when they say something that I have a hard time with.
When you say that, are there general themes, that contribute to this resistance? Like, what would be an example of something that you're sort of like,
Well, there's my resistance, and then there's an audience member's resistance. So the audience member's resistance might be, who is this guy? Why does he say everything twice? Because I whisper and repeat. He doesn't look the part. He's not wearing white. He's not, he's not doing it the way, or this doesn't exist and there's no such thing as channeling, and then a lot of people actually come to the work that comes through me at that place and then move beyond it, which I'm happy about, when that happens. My own resistance is when they start talking about anything that seems to have an echo of science to it, because that's not my vocabulary at all. And I could care less, and I flunked science, I think, probably. I just never went, to biology and stuff. But they don't generally speak in scientific terms. They say the language of science is of the time and will be outdated soon. And they tend to speak in musical terminology. They speak of octaves and notes and transposition of tone, things like that I can sort of understand conceptually. But when they talk about matter, and how things are changed through consciousness, I go, whoa, wait a minute, and then they'll have to back up and sort of unpack it for me. Most of the time, I did a session this morning and I wasn't objecting to anything. And they said, Paul has a question, and I didn't. And I realized they were just using me as the opportunity to unpack a question that I would have had if they kept talking.
They
And
know you so
some-
well.
Well, they've been known to preempt questions. Only there's one book where I literally derailed a whole chapter with my objections. And they said, we're just going to keep teaching and we'll decide at the end if this is in the book. And because that just lowers the stakes for me, because the rule for the books is I don't get to go back and fix them. There may be 3 words that are altered in any text, and that's usually just because I mispronounced them, or I said it too fast, or I was speaking so quickly that I jumped over it. And you can usually hear it in the recording on the whisper. It's usually able to discern what the intended word was. Like 3 words in a book of, I don't know how many ever thousands of words. Pretty good. What was I saying? So, I don't know. What was I talking? What was the question again?
Your what forms of
It's
resistance?
all that stuff. It's the stuff that I can't necessarily get behind. I like that I remember that I derailed a chapter. That's what I was talking about. So I derailed a chapter, and then at the end of the chapter, they said, this is in the book. And it's a whole chapter. It's in the Book of Knowing and Worth, where they end up sort of speaking to my resistance and my fear. And I was, I can't say that I was mortified that it was in there. I just don't think it's what they expected. I don't think it's sort of how the book was meant to be structured. And I think they put together a beautiful book. It's actually one of my favorites. But what they do now is they work with me, or they override me, or they say, we'll take your question later, and that's fine with me. I like knowing that they're in charge. When they say not now, I'm actually kind of relieved, because it means they have an agenda and they're going to meet it in spite of me if need be.
Do you feel that this team of guidance or guides, do you feel that there's, have they ever revealed anything to the effect of part of this guidance team is your high self oversoul coming through?
No, I mean, there's an aspect of me that they say is working with them.
Mm-hmm.
And that they've said that there's an aspect of me that is of them that is incarnated here. So they've said that much, so that I'm already party to the group, so that this isn't a new relationship. But no, I mean, I can, I work in different ways. I'm a radio. That's my job description. I'm a radio. It's really simple. I'm not special. I'm not a spiritual teacher. I'm not a guru. I don't want to be any of those things. And I'd prefer that people not to voice that stuff in my direction, because it's just not who I am. But, what I'm able to do is tune in. And I've been developed for that. My system seems to be developed for that. So when I'm channeling the guides, it's like I'm turning the radio that I am to play a specific station, and then they come through. And if I'm doing psychic work and I'm reading, you become the station, if I'm reading you, that I tune into. Or if you want to talk about your mother, I can tune into your mother. That's the station that I get the information from and the frequency of. So my higher self, whatever that is, seems to serve, I suspect, as conduit. I mean, finally, I think the dictation is coming in energy and is translated into language in some fashion using my capacity to speak. But, my ears aren't involved. It literally is. And it's as it was at the very beginning. It's like a thought comes at the cost of all other thoughts that interrupts my own process, isn't what I would choose, and has a different torque and sense of, sense structure and vocabulary. The guides use language that I do not use in my daily life. So I've never called anybody my fellows. You and your fellows would like to know. It's like, that's not how I would do it. But I like the consistency of them and how it works. And I think I look at that slightly differently than my intuitive self when I get a feeling about something. And you can call that more higher self. But channeling is another consciousness. That's all.
Yeah. I'd love to ask you about your psychic abilities. I know that you're very sensitive to energy, and I'd love to know, is it almost like you're taking on the energy of the person that you're reading? And do you get any sort of, specific communication that comes through, or
Yeah,
symbols or anything like
I
that?
didn't get anything specific. There'd be no point in working, you know. So I didn't know that I could do this. You know, I'd been a playwright when I was younger, you know, and I was a good one, but I, I didn't even realize any of this. I used to play one piece of music on loop for hours. And what I was doing was putting myself into trance without knowing it. And then I would let the characters talk. And that was sort of how I worked. And this was after I had been channeling and doing my group for a while. Somebody came to talk to my guides and said, she asked about her father and all this. My eyes were closed and she gasped. She said, "You started to look just like him." And I said, "Really?" Then I found out I could do it pretty much every time. If I tuned into somebody, I would take on their stuff and could get information here. So that was kind of a happy accident how that happened. It's clairsentience, but it's also a form of mediumship. And my good friend Laura Day says, mediumship is becoming the object of inquiry, which is how I work, which is different than kind of looking at it from every angle outside, which is another way to read. So, when I'm channeling, I've been told, I haven't seen it, but I hear it. It happens online even. My eyes often turn a very pale blue and I have dark eyes. When I'm stepping into other people, yeah, there's a series of symbols and gestures that mean different things. If you ask, what's going on with my boyfriend, and I tune into your boyfriend and he's licking his lips and he's looking all over the place, that means he's lusty and looking everywhere. If he's only looking at you, that means something else. But also, it's all odd. I was once reading for somebody and I stepped into somebody and I went like that. And I go, "I don't know what this is. I've never done this before." And they said, "He's a skier. Those are the poles." So I was tuned. That's what it
Oh,
was.
wow.
So I'll do that kind of thing. And I like that because it's kind of provable. I've been filmed doing this with people, and then the people that I've been tuning into have been filmed separately from me. There was a TV show I was on years ago called The UneXplained, where they had me tune into, for a mother to tune into her kid, and I somatized the kid's cerebral palsy without knowing what I was doing. I mean, it was shocking to see. And I went deaf and the kid was deaf. I mean, the whole thing was just like a bizarre. But I didn't really realize I was working at that level until I saw that. And then I went, wow, this is real. And I don't know, I'm sure there's some scientific explanation, mirror neurons or something. It does go to remind us that we're not separate from each other. We're having our own experiences, but finally we're all the same energy, which is, how this happens. So yeah,
Yes.
that's some of the psychic work I do. I'm not a fortune teller, but I do a lot of work. I do some of that, but it's not what I'm here for. I don't tell people where they shouldn't move, but I will tell you why your adult child is no longer speaking to you and what you might do about that,
Yeah.
because you can kind of hear everybody.
Is there an element of what you do that's either, emotionally or physically exhausting in any way?
Yeah, it depends. I did a 5-day group here, on my home a couple of weeks ago because there's a new book due and I wanted to, and I had missed doing it in front of a live group. So we were able to support that. And I'm still coming back from that, but I was channeling, probably every class was about 5 hours long and 3 hours of that probably was straight channeling, which is a lot for me for a day. And then I have to go through all the energetic adjustments because the gods are working with energy. So I do feel it. There are times when I'm wonderfully energized by the work and other times when I'm a bit more tapped out. I think when I'm a bit more tapped out, that's because I'm in a process with the teachings myself. Not that I think I'm being drained by the work, but that I have to go through the changes that the guides are teaching too. But, I honestly say, I enjoy what I do. I'm grateful for the work. It's now my livelihood. And, but, I love teaching college too, and I was very good at it. So That didn't feel like work. This does feel like work some days. But my job is to show up for this stuff even when I don't want to. I mean, that's my practice, and so that much I can do. And the deal has been, if I show up, the guides will show up. And so far, they haven't left me alone on a stage in front of, 200 people. I always used to worry that that would happen. But so far, knock wood, they've been there when I've been there.
So I'm wondering, so there's then definitely a connection, or this is a question, is there a connection to this as divine service? I know you kind of have mentioned that you sort of keep yourself a little bit at, distance from any sort of embodiment of teacher, guru, it's simply the radio and the channel, but yet is there some element within you that was ignited during that experience back in the, in the 1980s that you felt like the sense of connection with your, divine service here? Because certainly
the challenge with this is that you get to move into the idea of specialness with this. And I think that's a real trap in the spiritual culture. So, I mean, I do these workshops, and people say, how can I be of service? And they think I have to become a channel, or I have to open a Reiki studio, or it's got to look like that. And the guides say how we serve is how we live our lives in the highest way. One of the attunements the guides work with is, I know who I am, which is identity as of source. I know what I am, which is the manifestation of that. And then how we serve, they say, is the expression of that. So yeah, I mean, I think that this is what I do, but I don't put what I do in a higher echelon than what somebody else is doing, which may not appear to be spiritual. When I was a new teacher, when I was about 26 years old, I was fresh out of graduate school. I was flat broke, and I never thought I would be teaching. It just happened, and I happened to have a gift for it. I, was on a new spiritual path, but I remember going to schools to meet with, assistant principals in the South Bronx, which in those days was really a war zone. And I was meeting some of the most embodied, enlightened people I'd ever met who were working in those schools. It was really, really humbling. They loved those kids, and they were there for all the right reasons. And I was stunned. And this is somebody who wouldn't know what a chakra was if you gave him $20 and could care less, nor did they need to know. They were there doing their work. People sometimes say, which is funny, and the guides have talked about this, they say, well, my spiritual life is great, but my business life, as if they're two different things. And finally, it's just your life.
Mhm.
It's all your spiritual life, because your spiritual life isn't separate from anything else. So do I think I'm in service? Yes, I do. But I also think my definition of service is a simple one. And how one serves is how one is most fully expressed as the true self. That's true service, which is just how you show up in an awareness of the holiness of others. And I think that's about it. Guides say everything is holy. We just have a good time at denying it, and that's why we have such an experience of separation.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you.
Yes. So I'd love to get into your newest book, The Kingdom, and then open it up to some questions from our audience. Would you say, Paul, that right now humanity is at a crossroads?
Yeah, I mean, the guides have been saying this for about, since the very first book. In the very first book, I Am the Word, which was dictated in 2009, they said humanity is at a time of reckoning, and the reckoning is a facing of oneself and all of one's creations. And everything that's been created in fear needs to be re-seen or re-known in a higher way. And they've titled chapters of their books, Humanity at a Crossroads. But what they've begun saying, and this is really only in the last year, and I've been happy about this, they said, humanity has chosen to make it. We've chosen collectively to move beyond the old paradigm of fear, but how we choose to do this is in some ways up to us. And they say, you can either ride the crest of the wave or you can be pummeled by it, but that the changes are here. And they've been saying, we're in a period of deconstruction now, which we've been in for a few years, and it's escalating, which is sort of what hasn't been working is becoming really apparent. It's not been working, and it's not just been working now because we're seeing it. It's not been working for a long time, and it's time to be addressed. And the guides have said, it's as if we're living now in an archaeological dig. And imagine if in your backyard, what got buried there 5 years ago is joined by things that were buried 5,000 years ago. And it's all coming to the surface. And it comes to the surface to be re-seen, because nothing is transformed until it's been brought to the light. And they say if you got a body buried in the basement, eventually it's going to stink up the whole house. So what we're dealing with is that kind of exhumation right now, because it's an opportunity for growth. And this is how I see this time. So I see it as a challenging time, but a time of great opportunity for growth as well.
Yeah, when you say that the collective soul of humanity is ready for change, what is meant by that exactly?
Well, the guides have said that everything is in change now. Everything is lifting, and the level of vibration that's available to us now is high. And so how we choose to align to that as opposed to fight it is in some ways up to us. They say that the reality that we're born into is pretty much fraught with fear. You know, it's just a thread that's just run through the whole tapestry of our reality. It's what we've grown up with and what we know. They say it's kind of like, you know, you grew up in a world where somebody already peed in the pool before you got in, and that's the energy of fear. And they said, you know, if you want to lift, they're giving us the opportunity and a system with which to do that. So when they call to the upper room, which is the gateway, as I understand it, to what they call the kingdom. They say that the kingdom is the realization of the presence of the divine in all things, which is, again, re-seeing everything in order for it to be made new, re-seen, transformed, or they would say transposed. So they say we're all living in an octave. This is a shared octave of vibration. An octave has high and low notes. There are some pretty awful things and some pretty wonderful things in the octave. But what they're doing is they're supporting us in lifting to what they say the next octave is, or the octave above. And they say any piece of music can be transposed to be played in a higher octave, and that's the process now. So from the higher octave, things are different. Things can be chosen beyond fear, because fear doesn't express there. That's a creation of the lower realms that we're attached to. And they say the action of fear is to claim more fear. And every choice we make in fear gets us more of the same, but they make an important distinction about prudence. So fear and prudence are two different things. If it's raining out and you don't want to get soaked up, pack an umbrella. The rain isn't evil. You just don't need to get wet. You understand? That's prudence. That's not fear. So that's how I understand it right now.
Beautiful.
Yeah. There are several attunements in the book. Can you share some of the attunements and how they work?
Oh, the big one in all of the books are energetic transmissions that work. The guides say directly on the reader. That's been true since the first book. And they say this is a book that will be experienced more so than read. And the reviews started coming in for the first book, and there was no press on that. Nobody knew who I was. And nobody was advertising it. People started finding the book, and they would post this review saying, you know, I'm reading this book and my body's vibrating. I'm reading this book and I'm seeing auras. I mean, all that, those phenomena. So the attunements progress as the books progress so that we can hold the level of alignment that they're supporting us in. And the primary claim in the kingdom is the attunement, God is, God is, God is, which they say is, you're not making God where it is, you're claiming God where it already is.
Yeah.
God is, God is, God is a statement of fact. They say again and again in this book that the only real problem humanity faces now is what they call the denial of the divine. You know, saying God is not there, cannot be there. And the guides have taught again and again, who you put in darkness, what you put in darkness calls you to that darkness. And so we're all hanging out in the dark, just self-justifying it. And The antidote for that is the claiming of the omnipresence of the divine. God is, God is, God is. You know, when I just had people over to do this last round of book dictations, the guides worked with the attunements with a group, and I hadn't had the opportunity to do that when the kingdom was being, you know, channeled, because I wasn't in a room with people. I was doing it all on Zoom. I mean, they did the attunements with the Zoom group. I could feel the energy shifts, but when you're in a room with people and you feel this stuff, it's really quite something. You can feel the energy just move everything.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. So one question that I have, and I wonder if you get this often, but just this, you know, experience of vacillation between moving to an higher octave and then lower.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they talk about it a lot, and I mean, I'm there. You know, I go up and down all day long, I think, but I'm much better than I used to be, and my foundation seems to have shifted to the higher, so that I'm more comfortable with this idea of being at this level, which is more peaceful, I have to say, than what I was used to. The book that preceded The Kingdom, which is called Alchemy, is where they really get into sort of managing the emotional self that is sort of in reaction to such a point where it is pummeled so much by change. And that was the hardest book I ever had to sit through, because my life was, I was really having to deal with it as the guides were teaching, and it was just something I never have to live through that again. But I grew a lot through it, I have to say.
You're going through a Saturn and return, if
I know I'm done, that's what I've
but
been
during
told.
Alchemy, were you going through?
I was probably going, yeah, that's what I was
Yeah.
told. It was my Saturn return. And I remember the first one, which was a kick in the head when I was 28. So it was awful. I mean, it was, but that's when my work came into being, was at that point. That's when I was moving into this and away from who I thought I was supposed to be, which was hard. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's what my experience is, but I'm learning this stuff too. And they say, you know, it's a choice in some ways to go back into fear. And they said, you know, fear, they said something really interesting in a recent dictation, which I didn't know. And they said, fear's stupid. Fear doesn't ascend. Fear is always operating at its level. It's kind of like a cancer. It'll eat everything in its path, but it doesn't necessarily grow wise, you know? And I mean, maybe it gets tricky, I don't know, but I think that's a little bit different. When they talk about moving to this vibration that they call the upper room, they say, you know, there is no fear there. So if you want to have your fear, you got to go back downstairs. And we can do that. And fear is something that we can choose to learn through, but it's not the highest way to learn. I mean, we can learn that, you know, nuclear war is destructive by blowing ourselves to kingdom come. But until then, we're going to have people that say, well, bombs are keeping us safe, which if you think about it is kind of ridiculous, you know, that a bomb will keep us safe. Eventually, one day, somebody's going to set one off, and that's that, unless we change. And they're teaching us that change and how to begin to operate at that level, I hope.
What do you see? I know we're talking about humanity being at a crossroads right now, and certainly everything that you're bringing through is so beautiful and truthful. Where do you see humanity? You know, I know it's hard to know exactly, but in terms of, like, you know, what your guidance brings through this upper room that's spoken of, you know, is there a felt sense of when the critical mass of humanity might have, you know, chosen to go upstairs and stay up there?
They're saying, you know, I just heard this in a session last week, and I wasn't expected to, and it's in the next book, but I heard 4 generations it's going to take for us to really sort of reacclimate to the new, and that we're in a period now of deconstruction. You know, it's kind of like the house that's, you know, riddled with termites, kind of, it can't be fixed anymore. Something new needs to be built. We're still trying to say the old is going to save us, and it hasn't and doesn't and has not yet. So that's what I understand the process is. Now, I don't know. I don't love it when they make predictions. It really makes me uncomfortable. But in the very first book, I'm the Word, they said something to the effect of, you know, that we, all of us here, are the first in a generation that's making this possible, and that's the work now. So I don't get that, like, on some special day where there's a planetary alignment, everybody's going to wake up and start singing Kumbaya. I wish that would, but I don't see that right now. We're experiencing fear and the division that fear seeks to operate through. All this factioning and this need for separation, all this need for blame. I think we're all accountable to our creations, to our choices, to our acts. But I think humanity as a whole is having to be accountable now to these things in other ways, which is how we treat one another, how we treat the planet, and the biases that we hold that are really there to confirm an idea of separation. They said, the guides at some point, like, our belief that we were separate from the one beside us came to the point where we finally believe we were separate from God as well, and that needs to be rectified, and can be. That's how they're teaching, at least.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, when you share about this time, I mean, it resonates deeply. There is just so much that's happening right now. And so one question that's coming through that I think is, many probably are feeling is just how do we continue to hold our energy at the level of attunements, even with, stuff that's happening in the world right now?
I think it's choice. I think it's, if you look at the idea that the action of fear is to claim more fear, and again, I make the distinction between fear and prudence because it's important. When people are sort of espousing separation, you have to be conscious of the outcome of that. The guides say very simply, what you damn damns you back. What you put in darkness or who you put in darkness calls you to that darkness. It's a really simple teaching of vibrational accord. They also say what you bless blesses you in return. And to bless something, they say, is to practice or know the presence of the divine upon the thing you see. And that can be where it seems to be the most heinous, or where God seems to not be present. And the claim, God is, God is, God is, which they say claimed from the upper room, is really powerful. It's true in the lower strata, but in the lower strata, we're so moored to the fear that we're probably just trying to fix things. And this isn't really about fixing things. It's about re-knowing things. One of the other attunements in the kingdom is the claim, behold, I make all things new, which they say is the realization of the inherent divine through the divine self, the monad. Sometimes they call it the Christ, that is the one who sees anew. It's not my Paul, the small self, who says, well, it should look better, it should look different, this is what spirituality should look like, this is what God should be. All those shoulds go out the window. The guides say there is one note being played in the entire universe that is in manifestation as all things. Everything is of that one tone, that one note played, and it's operating at varying levels of density or vibration. And so this is a teaching in many ways of reclamation and reclaiming the inherent divine where it's been denied.
And so in this sense, would you say that the guides are teaching about manifestation in a different way?
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, I think we're coming out of a period where everybody sort of realized that things could be had. So suddenly the universe became a big catalog of stuff, and everything is available in a higher level, but this is a somewhat different teaching. It's a teaching of allowance. So it's less about, I'm going to get what I think I should have, because much of what we think we should have is what we're taught to desire and want, which is by cultural edict. I should look a certain way, have a certain kind of job. I should have this much money in the bank. This is what it means to be happy, which is frankly not true. That's not true. It's just what we bought into. So they're talking about moving to a place of alignment where you become receptive to source. And they say, source knows what you require before you ask it. So your needs are then met. And you're going into a place of agreement to source, which is the practice again of the presence of the divine, which is not a new teaching. It's all new thought, I suppose, but the guides are doing it in their own way. So yeah, I mean, my experience was, I was a lifelong New Yorker, pretty much, and I knew something was coming because the guides had said it was coming in a live stream. And I remember saying at the time, "Please just don't let me be in New York. I lived through 9/11 in New York. I lived through the AIDS epidemic in New York. I said, no more in New York." I said, "Just let me be someplace pretty." So it just so happened that I was working in Costa Rica when New York went into lockdown last March, and I couldn't go home. And I ended up being routed because I had a friend here who found me a place to stay to Maui, and I never left. And I found a home and community and things that I wouldn't have known that I really needed or wanted, because I didn't have the outline for it. My own outline was okay, but it was based on what I thought my life should be, and what I'm being given is I think better, and more perfect in its way. And I'm learning to trust that we can be in a place of reception when we stop demanding, "Give me what I want." We can allow ourselves to receive what can be brought to us.
Have you noticed that your work has evolved in any way since being in Maui?
My life has evolved since I've been on Maui, and I'm grateful for that. It's not that I don't have rough patches, but I'm far more peaceful and I'm more happy than I was without even knowing that I would be. And the guides have now dictated, a book and a half here in the last 15 months or whatever it's been since I've been here. Maybe it's closer to 17. So their work has progressed. And I actually find, for the most part, that the channeling is very fluid here for me. But I'm very fortunate, and I know that, I was able to do this. And there were times in my life when I would not have been able to do this and to be here. So it's easy to be grateful right now, when I think of what my other options might have been. So that's where I am today.
Beautiful.
There's an awesome picture of you on Instagram at 22 years old. And I'd love to just know, how your life has evolved and surprised you since that time.
You're talking about the Billy Idol Platinum Blonde?
Yes.
Oh, I used to love Billy Idol, by the way.
Yeah. I liked him, but I was dating somebody who wanted a blonde, so I ended up getting my hair dyed a lot. The date with us was a bottle of gin and a bottle of peroxide over my head. Those were the old days. I was a rock and roll playwright. I was a hard drinking, sort of self-destructive kid who was talented. And I was who I was. I have no shame at all about that time and those years. And I wasn't spiritual. I think when I look back at my work in those years and the plays that I was trying to write, they were about I was always looking about for transcendence, but that's a lifetime ago, truthfully, for me. So how everything's changed, and I gotta say, none of this was graceful. None of this was easy. Very little of it was actually fun, and perhaps I made it much harder than it needed to be. But when I sort of opened up spiritually, and so around the time I quit drinking and stuff, I kind of fell apart. I really didn't have a context for who I was anymore and who I was supposed to be in the world, and something I couldn't write, and I was very young, and I didn't know what to do. And I was fortunate to become a teacher, and I found that I excelled at that, and it was something that I cared about. And it was a gift for me in my teaching in a lot of ways, in the classroom, either at NYU, where I taught for 25 years, and I ran a graduate program at Goddard College in Vermont for 18 of those years. That was my spiritual practice as much as anything else. So that's how I developed. And then finally, this work became predominant, and I couldn't pretend I wasn't doing it anymore, because there were books out with my name on the cover and YouTubes with me channeling, looking pretty crazy. And I went, okay, I guess it's time. And so I did.
One question that's coming through, somebody says that they've been drawn to purchase the book Mastery Trilogy, and they've just begun reading book 3, and they were wondering how this trilogy differs from your other books.
Well, every trilogy seems to operate in its own way. So the first 3 books, I Am the Word, the Book of Love and Creation, the Book of Knowing and Worth, I think in many ways are preparatory. I think the guides lay out their teaching in the very first book and then begin to unpack them in the second. In the third book, they really address our own lack of worthiness, the belief that we're not worthy for this. The Mastery Trilogy is really about alignment. And it's some tough stuff in there. You know, it's really about how we begin to claim identity in a very different way. And then the newest trilogy, the last trilogy that was published, which ends in a kingdom, is really the teaching of the upper room. It's what happens when we cross the threshold that they speak about at the end of the second trilogy. And I didn't know what they were teaching then, but now I know, because then they ended that second trilogy with everybody stepping over a threshold to welcome their new lives. And the third book begins in the third trilogy begins in the upper room, which is the work of that trilogy. And now they're teaching embodiment, you know, which is a whole other teaching than they brought through before. And I'm kind of reeling from that, but we'll see where they go.
Yeah, I'm curious. I feel, or let me rephrase it. Do you feel that your heart space is expanding, you know, more and more with each of these newest channeled works, the trilogy? It feels like, from my perspective, it appears there's this beautiful softness and sort of real embodiment of divine masculine that's radiating from you. Do you feel like this just keeps on sort of happening more and more?
Well, I mean, I hope that I'm an expression of the teachings, you know, in my life, and that the energy is present. The guides I work with don't talk about divine masculine, divine feminine. The healing modality that I studied many years ago was all rooted in the divine feminine before people were talking about it. It was the Mary energy that was being taught. And that was my training initially. But the guides don't go there that much. Is my heart opening more? I believe it is, but I think sometimes when your heart opens more, it's kind of like, you know, if you have a suitcase that pops open, the crap's still gonna start flying out of it. And so for me, it's not all that graceful. I really don't know anybody who's truly been on a spiritual path that hasn't had to confront. People now call it shadow, says the shadow work, the shadow self, or those parts of ourselves that we deny. And I think that happens progressively as we move forward. And I think we stop just dealing with our own stuff. We're also dealing with the collective stuff as well, which we don't even know we're attached to because it's all we've known. And the guides are, you know, addressing that now in these books as well, which is moving beyond the collective agreements to separation, which we were born into.
There's a great question that came through that's somewhat related to that. And that is, do you believe an individual can reach the upper room in this lifetime? Or are we somehow limited to the consciousness of all?
No, I think it can be done in this lifetime. I don't think they would be teaching it otherwise. I think it happens first in the individual and then in the collective. So the upper room is a state of alignment that one can come to, and it's actually the next octave. So I understand that there's high and low notes there as well. And I think sometimes the upper room is sort of the entryway, the foyer to everything that exists beyond it, which is, you know, our own true knowing, our own true availability to be in service at this level. And that's my sense. But do I think, yeah, I think some of it's choice, and I think it's, you know, they don't drag anybody to the upper room by the hair. We have free will. It's up to us what we want to do with it. We can learn the old way. We can learn a new way. It's really up to us. And I think that's probably as it needs to be. I mean, you know, it's a challenging teaching, but it's a teaching that honors the individual, I think, and, you know, the needs of the individual soul and heart as much as anything else.
Do you recommend that people read your books in the order that they were written?
It's not going to hurt, but people are actually entering these books wherever they find them. And the guides have said that they teach in a one-room schoolhouse and they'll meet every student where they are. So I think that they create a foundation in the earlier books and they begin to work with people to support them in moving to a higher alignment of the energy. But you can enter with the kingdom too and benefit, I suspect, completely. It just may sort of be an upheaval in your system if you do the work, because, you know, it's the difference between sort of moving a mound of sand and moving a few shovelfuls at a time to reveal what's underneath it. So
What an amazing opportunity to meet with just an incredible being that has brought forth so much wisdom and opportunity for humanity to grow and expand and accelerate in whatever way, you know, is unique to each individual.
Yeah.
And I mean, wow.
Yes. Wow. We are so grateful to Paul Selig for joining us for such an incredible conversation. And thank you all for tuning in today. We definitely apologize for the technical difficulties. We had a power outage and storm that was taking place here in Florida. But luckily we were able to, you know, have such a rich conversation and sharing. And so we just want to thank all of you for joining us and for the wisdom and beautiful, you know, guidance that came through today.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you next time, which is just in a few short weeks from now.
Yes. Many blessings to you all. Thank you all for joining us.
All right.